Good morning. I'm Duncan MacLennan, and I want to tell conference about some work that we're doing for SFHA, myself and Andrew Watson, on our work for the David Hume Institute. And what we're looking at is trying to construct a narrative of what housing associations do for not just the economy of households, but the economy of small places, neighbourhoods, but also regions and indeed Scotland as a whole. It's an important narrative. It doesn't really exist. Over the last 18 months, our work for the David Hume Institute has concluded that Scotland, like much of the OECD countries, now faces a long evolved housing polycrisis that impacts more or less severely on 2 out of 3 Scots. The causes lie in international as well as local social and economic shifts. They're not just about policy and policy changes. They're not all down to the Scottish Government or local government or the UK government. The processes are much broader than that, and they're international as well as local. These outcomes that are adverse to polycrisis has consequences that, as I say, reflect, I think, decades of failure to understand what housing is and what housing does. We talk about housing, but we never really clarify what we mean. We never really clarify what it does. We have statistical targets like 1 time below tolerable, now standard, scale, size, tenure, but we don't actually talk about what we create and what it does to any significant extent. And it has social, environmental and economic consequences. Housing, in fact, is one of the great integrative systems in any society or economy. It affects the well-being of individuals, places, the nation as a whole. We deal with the housing system in a single, simple silo, and we focus on housing regulation and housing spending, whereas we need to take account of a multitude of other things. I think despite impressive efforts by the Scottish Government over the last 2 years, they rolled back some of the damaging regulations and significantly increased budgets for low-income housing. Despite that, the polycrisis is actually worsening. Although price rent burdens are marginally easing, supply is falling significantly, and both the government and market sectors are heading into a really difficult, uncertain and resource-constrained context that unless the way housing is understood, governed and delivered is radically improved and changed, the polycrisis will worsen. It will not ameliorate by 2030. We have to think differently. We have to act differently. Our DHI work in the past has highlighted the aspects of business as usual that currently dominate approaches will have to change. And it's about the Parliament. It's not just the government. There needs to be, I think, essentially cross-party agreement to make some of the big changes we need within the Scottish context. We always recognise the social and environmental cases for housing policy in seeking support, but we constantly stress how successive governments and Scottish secretaries before them, this isn't just about devolution, it's built into the way we think about housing in Scotland, have simply failed to address the economic consequences of the housing system. At the intergovernmental level, at Scottish, city, rural, region, local and neighbourhood scales, housing is neither discussed by policymakers nor present at the discussion tables and forums exploring to secure faster, fairer and greener growth for Scotland. Decision takers at all these scales have simply failed to recognise how associations have contributed to inclusive growth, even community wealth, as well as the wider impacts they have on labour, housing markets and other market and non-market systems too. Like SFHA, we recognise the extraordinarily difficult policy challenge the Cabinet Secretary now faces. And the narrative we're trying to construct, we hope will not only help revitalise the government's approach, to the role that associations play in the Scottish housing system, but we hope that it will help present a case to our cabinet colleagues, and particularly finance ministry and economics officials, that housing, and particularly non-profit housing, has an important role in the economy. In other words, the Cabinet Secretary, we wish her all the best in a really difficult challenge she faces. And with her officials and a new agency, we hope she adopts a collaborative systems management approach to housing change. We don't want silos. We don't want just simply a single focus on social. It has to be wider, and I'm sure that's where the Cabinet Secretary intends to go. Such an approach is missing at present. Our research for SFHA is exploring how housing as key household and community infrastructure impacts economic outcomes. We're, as economists, interested in three big questions about the economy: the distribution of income and wealth. Housing now actually drives these distributions as well as simply reflects them. So we know that's important. We know something about it. The second thing is the stability of incomes and the avoidance of cycles, business cycles, employment, income fluctuations, and the income effects of housing investment, multipliers, and so on. Again, these are quite well established. They're no secret. But when it gets to discussions about resource allocation within finance ministries, or indeed the general stories that government are seeking now, the concern is, how does all this contribute to growth? In other words, our concern particularly is how productivity and growth are influenced by housing outcomes, in particular by housing association outcomes. And we think there is a real lacunae of information and indeed interest in the housing growth story. We need one urgently. We're looking at the economy in three levels: the national level, the metro-rural, regional level, and at local level. We find no credible growth stories for Scotland at any of these scales. We are unimpressed by the macroeconomic level of the Scottish analysis done by the Scottish Government. There's no housing growth story in that analysis at all, and that has to change. We also recognise that all the multiplier studies that are done at more local scales, they simply ignore growth and productivity in the long term. They are not inherently what we're looking for. At the regional scale, only rural regions in the Highlands and in the South Scotland have actually linked housing and the economy in their stories. The city deal partnerships, the local economic partnerships have simply failed to take one of the largest economic systems within their regions or within their partnerships with any degree of seriousness, and have failed to actually address causes and consequences of change within it. So housing's not at the agenda of policymakers, decision takers when it comes to thinking about economic development. And remarkably, I think at more local scales in Scotland, if you look at the work of EDAS, there's relatively little mention of the housing sector within it. Even given the emphasis on community wealth, housing associations in Scotland are the largest holders of community wealth, but they feature very little in that discussion. So to redress this, we've been doing a literature review. We've been undertaking a statistical survey of economic activities of associations, and then passing, I would simply note that associations are happy arguing their cases and filling in data forms. So would you please send the survey back completed? And finally, we've been interviewing about 10 to 12 associations about what they see as their economic outcomes and roles. And these vignettes are really telling. And we're going to build the narrative starting upwards and try and build to a longer, bigger perspective. Thank you.